Gostaria de começar saudando a todos os
I'd like to begin greeting all speakers and participants at the webinar. I'm Carlos Padilha, investment analyst at ApexBrasil, Brazilian agency for promotion of exports and investments. I'm responsible for the project of investment attraction in oil and natural gas. Today's event is part of a series of initiatives in a work group led by the Ministry of Mines and Energy of Brazil that in which are part the National Petroleum Agency, Biofuels and ANP, Pre Sal Petroleo, PPSA, and the energy research company, PPSA, apart from ApexBrasil. We are an agency bonded to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with the mission to promote Brazilian products in Brazil, internationalization of Brazilian companies, and attraction of foreign investments to Brazil. It's a huge pleasure to have you with us to exploit opportunities for investment in oil and gas sector in Brazil. I'd like to remind the national and international public that the presentations will be recorded and made available at our website and YouTube channel. Apart from that, ApexBrasil will organize with the speakers requests for meetings that can occur virtually and also in person at Pavilion Brasil during the participation of the group at Offshore Technology Conference on August 16th to 19th. Any meeting request can be done to oilandgas@apexbrasil.com.br. We will schedule the meetings and get in touch with you. Our webinar today will have many opportunities for investment in exploitation and production. Especially our speakers will explain with more detail the conditions involving second round of rights, transfer of production sharing bidding round. Initially, we have the honor to invite for the welcome word, ApexBrasil's President Augusto Pestana. President, you have the floor. Mr. President, please, we still can't hear you. I think you see me very well. Technical issues here that we always solve quickly. Thank you very much, Padilha. I'd like to say good morning to everyone. Be very welcome to this event for investment opportunities in oil and gas sector promoted by ApexBrasil in partnership with the Ministry of Mines and Energy. And I'd like to greet all investors here and thank you very much for your president, Mr. Minister of Mines and Energy, and other authorities involved in modeling the projects that will be presented. This is a huge importance sector with meaningful potential for businesses. We expect investment in exploitation and production to be $400 billion up to the end of the year. And in this context, ApexBrasil's commitment is very important. We are bonded to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the federal government to help and facilitate these investments. We were responsible last year for more than $5.3 billion of investment in Brazil. Our mission is to incentivize more foreign investors to take advantage of Brazil's opportunities. We are here to support you and provide information and build bridges between private and public actors. The natural gas and oil sectors is among the priority sectors amongst the attraction for investment access. It couldn't be different. Apart from the perspectives I mentioned, we're talking about a key sector on Brazilian economy with an expressive part in our production. We had also strategic, consistent planning, and now we are world reference in offshore exploitation. Its economic role increased very much because of oil findings done at the so-called pre-salt. So proudly, ApexBrasil joins the Ministry of Mines and Energy to present a panorama for opportunities that the oil and natural gas sectors has for the next years. Once again, know that our channels are open to facilitate all your investments in your projects in Brazil. Thank you very much and have a good day of work. Mr. President, thank you for your words. To contextualize today's webinar, we have the honor to invite Minister of Mines and Energy, Admiral Penta Albuquerque, to take the floor. Admiral, you have the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, while greeting ApexBrasil's president, Mr. Augusto Pestana, I express my satisfaction to be able to participate in the opening of this first, amongst many other webinars, international webinars foreseen for 2021, in which will be the opportunities from the mines and energy sector will be presented, key for regaining the economic drive. We are beginning an important journey for interaction and promotion of these opportunities in coordination with the agents at the segment, having the participation of ApexBrasil, as well as Natural Gas and Oil Agencies, Petroleum and Pre Sal Company, and Energy Research Company. I thank especially for the participation and the interest of relevant actors at the world oil sector, many of which with active and traditional presence in Brazil. To face the mid-economic growth foreseen for the year, 3% up to the end of the decade, we will need investments of 2.7 trillion reais investments in energy sector, 79% guided to exploration and production of oil and natural gas. So it's a unique opportunity for national and foreign investors in a mature legal framework environment. And this first event is an important framework for the second auction of oil and gas in the world. In this new scenario, the second rights transfer of production sharing bidding round for the areas of Sépia and Atapu that counted with relevant contributions from institutions amongst the Federal Accounts Court, contributing for legal safety and regulation. So for this second round, since the second day after the largest oil and gas auction in the world, Búzios and Itapu in 2019, we've been working with method and process to assure transparency, traceability, elimination of uncertainties, and above all, attractiveness. As a result of this challenging process, the National Council of Energy Policy approved last April the economic and technical parameters for the bidding, prioritizing long-term and competitiveness through the tax legal aspect, and considering this perspective of a new participation of, in fact, we are before an adapted project, adapted to the oil industry, considering inclusively the liquidity of a sector. So, ladies and gentlemen, Brazil and the mines and energy sector have shown their resilience, highlighting in the world scenario and consolidating itself as a safe destiny for investment. I'm sure that we will keep on more and more committed and careful in contributing to the energy sector in the country so it can be a world highlighted sector. We will keep determined in helping to promote sustainable transformation of natural resources into prosperity and social well-being. I conclude restating the principles that brought us up to here. On the offer side, good practices of governance applied to the business environment. On the demand side, the public interest. On both sides, a strategic look towards the future. I wish the webinar is motivative and productive. We will soon have a new occasion to deepen the themes. During OTC in Houston, in the United States, in which I will participate in person together with my team.
Ministro, muito obrigado pela sua
Thank you, Minister, for your words. We will keep on with the webinar, opening the panel on investment opportunities and the bidding rounds, focusing the second rights transfer of production sharing bidding round. I remind you that the questions can be placed using the Q&A function and will be answered in the end of the panel during the Q&A sessions. I invite now the Executive Secretary of the Ministry of Mines and Energy, Mr. Bruno Eustáquio de Carvalho, to make his speech. Please.
Dia, Padilha, me ouve bem?
Good morning, Padilha. Can you hear me? Okay, everything fine. Good morning, everyone. First of all, can you see my screen? Yes, please keep on. I'd like to, first of all, greet Apex President Augusto Pestana. It honors us to have a cooperation agreement with this institution that will allow us to reach our institutional goals, exportation and promotion of investments as Ministry of Mines and Energy, and keeping on with the transfer of these assets to the best private partners, above all at the oil and gas sector. Also greet the Minister of State, Minister Bento, who has been providing all support and obviously tools. So the Executive Secretariat, together with the Oil, Gas and Biofuels Secretariat, E&P, PPSA, and the Ministry of Economics, could move forward in the process of structuring this complex project, which is the offer of these two areas, Sépia and Atapu. Thank you, Padilha, and greet you and all colleagues at ApexBrasil for the organization of this first relation with the ministry, with the industry in a model of roadshow. We had public hearing last week, so I'd like to greet you all. Also, my colleagues, directors at ANP, PPSA, and the Energy Research Company. My presentation will be very brief, and I want to basically establish three messages to all who listen to us in the process, and also thanking everyone who is participating in the event. Well, first message is that we have been using effectively planning as a program instrument to give a north to the oil and gas sector. So you can have you see this picture of where we are and where we want to go. And there is the relevance of these areas with foreseeability, keeping the business environment pretty safe, stable, foreseeable for the investors, as mentioned by our Minister of Mines and Energy. So here, basically, we're talking about increasing in 83% our production of barrels, and at the same time, more than double our natural gas production, above all, in the natural gas case, to drive the demand on the market opening side with a legal framework approved this year, resulting from a National Council for Energy Policy. And so Pre Sal has, during the trajectory, an expectation for investment. So without any doubt, this planning as a guiding instrument for our future position allows us to, or will allow us to get to 2030, reaching the goal to position ourselves amongst the 5 largest producers and oil exporters around the world, recognizing today, and above all in 2020, that brute oil had a relevant role in our commercial scale, occupying 2nd position in the extraction industry with 9% in 2020. This first message is what I'd like to enforce to all of you. Second message is that this process was led from a past learning and maximum usage of the institutional tools and abilities. So we had the signature of the pre-requirement of the bidding, and this auction had the participation of Petrobras as a winner with a consortium for Búzios and Atapu in 2019. And obviously, as a result of the process, we had the ability to close the contract with Petrobras and at the same time decentralize resources to the states and municipalities in Brazil. Because we didn't have any proposals for the 2 areas of, and the next day we began structuring the 2nd round, which will happen in the 4th semester of this year, specifically December 17th. If in 2019 we had a contract review process in the middle of the way to overcome, to unlock the bidding, in 2020 we had the pandemic problem. So in both cases we had huge challenges to be overcome, but we were able to reach on April 20th the economic parameters, and you will have the opportunity to see here how we evolved and how the whole process went through, having the participation of PPSA in the negotiation process with Petrobras and the whole support of PPSA in the whole decision-making process. The fact is that, as mentioned by the minister himself, we took over fundamental premises along the process that materialized somehow in the economic technical parameters. First, transparency at all times, interacting not only the negotiating party, but also the agents, controlling our institutions, traceability. Public managers have to decide based on evidence that should be traceable. So this was a paramount premise along the process. Even so, in order to allow this narrative that the Ministry of Mines and Energy has been mentioning to the market, and this is a central part, uncertainty reduction, attractiveness, and legal security around the process. So I close the second message to you. And obviously, I couldn't avoid mentioning the opportunity cost and investment opportunities regarding the granting of these 2 areas that add up to 12% of the national reserves, and that impose decisions of $2.1 billion and investments of $37.8 along the contract. So my last message regarding governance and modeling, I would first like to highlight, although the process is complex, process for negotiation to reach the decision at the National Council of Energy Policies, we have the most diversified institutional support from PPSA, as well as representative of the union in the negotiations with Petrobras, as well as from the Energy Research Company, Ministry of Economics, and ANP itself as central support for structuring the process. I highlight the two norms regulated the interaction to leave it to have solid legal framework, and also for good negotiation with Petrobras. That resulted in an approval with Petrobras of an agreement between the parts regarding the compensation value, which was an open variable in the process at 2019. And because of the control institutions in the 2430 ruling, it was up to the union to close this equation, going through the participations and reaching the economic technical parameters and also the compensation value. So I call your attention upon this third message to the focus given by the National Council of Energy Policy. If in 2019, the view from the council was guided towards the inspection dimension, subscription bonus. In 2021, the driver from the council guided itself to the future positions, materialized in concentration of the profit oil and the pillar central element for attractiveness through the inclusion of the analysis portfolio of a criteria called robustness price, but considering the perspective from the industry. So this new vision, which was incorporated together with all the conditions that were overcome as participations approved, compensation value, complementary value for compensation. And here I link this directly to the ministry from the Minister of Mines and Energy when we talk about solidness, the availability of the co-participation agreement amongst the documents, and obviously the strategy for development. So this whole package of decision composes the basket for this new round, and that in our evaluation effectively is adjusted to the new reality of oil. It's important to highlight as well in 2021 as well as in 2019, we built this whole analysis with an integrated view, always looking towards the bidding process, because this unlocks and places Brazil in the axis and towards the goal, as mentioned, to be amongst the 5 largest world producers. So in 2019, there was an integrated vision for the review of the bidding process. And in 2021, likewise, in our own systems and methods for supporting decision-making. So the robustnesses of the analysis, we analyzed data, we had Monte Carlo simulation to be able to assess how far we would be from compensation values that wouldn't impact solidness in the project. We used multi-criteria assessments with the help of the National Energy Council supporting the decision, and the National Council prioritized mainly the profit percentage and robustness price, subscription bonuses and others. We were, as a result of this multi-criteria analysis, in the end, we used the best of alternatives to maximize compensation for the union, but also recognizing competitiveness and the industry scenario and will to have this access to Brazilian. And this resulted in an expectation for public offers to be materialized in December this year. And obviously, to reach this point, we need to overcome preliminary phases that are already overcome. And the main trigger is the approval by the National Energy Council, the criteria that opened way for structuring on behalf of our National Oil Agency. So we closed last week the public hearing with more than 500 contributions. Our expectation is to consolidate this and send it to the Federal Accounts Court, seeking to meet to some extent some pre-requirements between the controlling institution and the executive branch, and having the collaboration of the Federal Accounts Court along the process and the contributions were materialized in reports and decisions from the Federal Accounts Court. And the call publication in October 15th, we had a reduction regarding the economic indicators that was above 70% for Atapu and of 68% to Sépia regarding the subscription bonus, and obviously 45% regarding the auction criteria, which is oil. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, the message that third message that I'd like to close is that we had decisions, or we took the decisions to the council using best possible information, using maximum institutional ability, and always observing the industry's perspective, legal safety, foreseeability, transparency, and at the same time, attractiveness. Thank you once again, Apex, for structuring this opportunity that starts a fruitful agenda from the ministry and its institutions for 2021. So effectively, we can face this answer that the Brazilian economy needs at the moment. Thank you all. Let's have a good event.
Agradeço ao senhor Bruno Eustáquio.
I thank Bruno Eustáquio for his speech. I'd also like to reinforce that ApexBrasil is honored and motivated in participating of this work group and attracting more investments to Brazil in the oil and gas sectors. Following up, I'd like to invite the manager of contracts of Pre Sal Petroleo, Oswald Coelho, to make his presentation. I ask him to open his camera and audio and share his screen so we can start his speech.
Todos enxergam?
Can everyone see my presentation? Perfectly, you just need to use the presentation tool. Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Minister, President of Apex, other colleagues and panelists of the hearing. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today to talk about such a relevant theme, being able to approach an overview of the projects of Sépia and Atapu. I work at PPSA, which is a public company attached to the Ministry of Mines and Energy that acts among the contracts of production sharing, which means that briefly, we will act together. Actually, PPSA has worked in Atapu and Sépia back when the auction of November last year happened, accomplishing determinations of the Court of Accounts 2030, which viewed to mitigate a few uncertainties present in the first auction of the surplus values, and this uncertainties of the Federal Court of Accounts was implemented of the Secretary of the Ministry of Mines and Energy, which qualified the PPSA to this noble task of representing the union in the negotiations of the percentages of participation, which calls track participations and the value to be paid regarding the compensations to Petrobras. Sépia and Atapu, areas located in the Pre Sal in the basin of Santos, are active, and those activities are being executed by Petrobras initially in that percentage of the onerous section, which guarantees those that enter this auction, the participants of the future sharing contract, that this project will be fully productive. In both areas are offered volumes, high volumes, along with the certainty of a module, an operational module, as I mentioned. All this having as a background the exceptional conditions of productivity that we already know in the pre-salt area that are pretty high. In the specific case of Atapu, PPSA actually already acts representing the union in an agreement of the legalization of the production, and this volume that I mentioned in Atapu is near 1.6 million barrels. The production began last year, almost a year ago in June of 2020. The operation of its own area, this unity in production, I just skipped all the slides, I'm sorry. All right, continuing. I had pressed the keyboard unwillingly, sorry. This percentage has a capacity of 60 million barrels. And right now, at this moment, with 3 wells of production, has already reached a level of 150,000 barrels a day due to the high productivity of the wells that I mentioned before. In the specific case of Sépia, the recoverable volume is a bit higher, 1.8 million barrels. As shared by Petrobras, the FPSO from Rio de Janeiro is a giant of 180 million barrels, is in its way to the location. The first oil of this unity may be collected in August of 2021. And in the case of Atapu, Sépia, we probably have very similar productivity rates. One of the steps of the work developed by PPSA along with Petrobras was specifically aligning the strategies of development of the production. These development strategies of the production seek not only the onerous section, but also to the area as a whole, joining contracts of sharing. And the great objective of this work was having a reasonable, precise overview and optimize of the field, so we could indeed calculate fairly related to the compensation values. In the case of Atapu, the strategy overviewed the implementation of 2 modules of production with 2 FPSO, P70 that I mentioned previously, and the new unity of 180 barrels to be hired. This new FPSO has the oil predicted to September. And these 2 models of Atapu would have the flexibility to opt by an injection and or exportation of gas, reminding you that we'll have something around 30 or 31 wells for the area as a whole. In the case of Sépia, the strategy of development was aligned in a similar way, also predicting 2 models of production, the first using the FPSO from Rio de Janeiro that we mentioned, and the second also with a new unity to be hired with the beginning of the production for September of 2027, as well as Itapu's. Atapu also has the flexibility necessary for the exportation of gas, and with more time, by the volumes and greater productivity in Sépia, we're talking about something below 30 wells. The strategies were evaluated in the scope of the discussion with Petrobras and PPSA, but will be revalidated and reassessed by the consortiums, which will have a deadline of 180 days for the submission of a development plan that is definitive. The many steps of negotiation with Petrobras went through different moments. The moment of the modeling, very technical modeling of reservoir, getting to the evaluation, economic evaluation, establishing parameters of market that were adequate to that moment, considering that we'll have different regimes on the recession in one side, sharing on the other, that were fundamental steps in the establishment of this strategy that I mentioned before. During the technical and economical evaluation of the areas, the main guidelines that we could observe, Petrobras and PPSA teams was in the way of following through with a few legal frameworks to the base of work without losing sight the attractiveness of the auction and the preservation of the present liquid value of Petrobras in the onerous section. This culminated at the end of the discussion in an agreement of co-participation that today is present in our website. This agreement established some pretty relevant aspects, the percentages of participation, which we call tracked participation, were agreed to and reached values of 60.5% and 68.7% to the future contracts of sharing for Atapu and Sépia, and the compensation values calculated with market parameters from this tracked participation reached values calculated previous to tax payments as being $3.25 billion for Atapu and $3.20 billion for Sépia. The establishment of a clause allowed an eventual recomposition of the compensation value in case there are variables of the price over $40 previously negotiated, having as a limit the payment above $70. This allowed us to leave the trap of the calculus of compensation to which value of oil, but now we're able to contemplate an elevated range of value. Now bringing you some highlights and seeking to summarize what I mentioned previously. We are before actives of worldwide class that will give access to the participants of a 3.5 billion of barrels. Besides that, the attractiveness of the auction was permanently maintained in the measure that the economic calculations indicated robust methods. At the same time, the production areas of the auction leads to an acquisition value that is considerably low. Along with all this, the agreement of co-participation that was elaborated in a way of guaranteeing the participants quick access to oil that also brings a previous view, but a reasonable view of a development global strategy of both areas. To finish my speech, I can only mention my great satisfaction to be a part of this great journey of structuring of this auction of surplus volumes of this onerous section. They were long days, unfinishable evaluations, great anxiety, but we know that this anxiety will only end indeed at the end of the year with a well-made auction. We dedicated a lot of time into this work, seeking to be fair in relation to the market in a general way. And my feeling is that we made it, but we will wait for you so we can celebrate together this great victory that the second auction will be and represent to the industry of oil and gas. Ending my speech, I thank you all. And I'll leave you the tip in case you need more information. I invite you to visit the website of PPSA. Our ebook recently launched, which the title is Understanding the Surplus Volumes of the Onerous Section. It seeks to be to cover many doubts that come up at many times, and I believe it can help every single one of you. Once more, thank you. And the floor is our colleague, Padilla. Thank you for the speech, Osman Coelho. I also thank the partnership in this beginning of the work for the second round. I'd like to restore that to our audience that the questions can be placed in the Q&A function and they will be answered at the end of the panel in the time established. In case it's not possible, they will be sent to our panelists so they can be answered posteriorly. Besides that, I'd like to remind you that Apex Brazil will be organizing agendas along with the panelists in a virtual way or presential, along with UTC in Houston. You should only send an email.
apexbrasil.com.br. Dando continuidade ao nosso painel, gostaríamos de convidar para palestrar o diretor da Agência Nacional de Petróleo, Gás
We'd
Natural,
like to invite
o senhor Dirceu Amorelli.
Mr. Dirceu Amorelli. Please,
Já pode
Dirceu.
abrir o vídeo e áudio e fique à vontade para compartilhar a sua tela para iniciar a apresentação. Dirceu,
Dirceu,
está nos ouvindo?
can you hear us?
Ok, a câmera está aberta, o áudio.
Ok, agora estou ouvindo.
Ok.
Yes, I can hear. Good morning, Padilha. Can you all hear me?
Tudo bem?
Agora já pode compartilhar a tela.
You can share the screen now.
Bom dia.
Good morning, Padilha.
Estou aqui o presidente da
I greet Apex President Augusto Pestana. I also greet our Ministry, Bento Albuquerque of Mines and Energy, and my colleagues,
Bruno Eustáquio,
Dr. Bruno Eustáquio, Dr. Osmond, Dr. Luisa Borges, Dr. Zé Mauro.
É prazer estar
It's a pleasure to be here
junto com essa turma que trabalhou.
with everyone who worked a lot to
Eu vou repartir aqui a minha,
arrive where we are.
vou colocar a minha apresentação.
I will share my presentation.
Todos veem?
Can you all see?
Iniciar já está informando.
Yes.
Bom, eu vou aqui agora
Now I will mention the right aspects regarding the auction and also something about the post-auction, the rights that are fundamented. ANP has to operationalize all the policy from the National Energy Policy Council and the Ministry of Mines and Energy. And to begin, I say that our process to make the auction and follow the oil companies in managing the exploration, we are based in this legal framework of legal and under legal norms that brings legal safety, as mentioned by Bruno Eustáquio. And what I always like to mention before beginning is that Brazil, apart from legal safety based in this legal framework I show you, we also have the tradition to honor the agreements, which is very good for the ones coming to invest in Brazil. So going into the auction issue itself, here we have our schedule. As Bruno and Osmond already mentioned, it's a long process, but we are reaching the final strip in the auction. And I'd like to highlight these dates. November 1st, where we have the deadline for document submission or interest manifestation and participation fees payment. And another important date is November 25th, where you have the deadline to assure or to present your offer guarantees. And I'll mention more about that later. And December 17th, we have, in 2021, we have our public session where it's an open session broadcasted worldwide. In qualification, the important items that are assessed in interest manifestation. The companies have to show their interest, pay the fees, and present their qualification. It's relevant that in this interest manifestation, this should be done individually, even if the company still has the intention to submit proposals in consortium. So the presentation of the document is done through forms that are e-forms. So we use the e-system from ANP, except for the guarantee offer. Instructions for this presentation, e-presentation, is in our website, anp.gov.br, where you have the user's manual, and you see how to do this through the web. Formal requirements are in section 3, and in section 4 we have 12A and 12B charts, kind of checklist for the documents, and also the payment procedures. Another piece of information that's interesting and I'd like to pass on to you is that the companies who participated in some kind of auction at ANP after January 2019 can reuse some documents, making the process simpler for the companies. In participation, payment for the fees when you write yourselves in is 410,000 reais. It's good for Atapu and Sépia, and it grants access to the technical data package. So this is an individual act for each of the companies, even if they intend to participate in consortium. And obviously, when they get access to the data, you must have a data confidentiality agreement in place. In qualification, we assess technical aspects, economic and financial aspects, legal aspects, and tax and labor compliance. And this is done individually. Each, and by individual, I mean the company can have its offer individually or in consortium, but this assessment is done individually, and this is an important piece of information. For offer guarantees or bid bonds, so we have reinforced. I may sound repetitive, but our experience shows it's worthwhile mentioning because companies are involved in the process and end up in the last day having trouble. So I'd like to mention the process as a whole and the important issues. So bid bonds are for November 25th. For Atapuma, we have 40 million reais, and for Sépia, 71 million reais that must be paid in reais currency. The instruments that ANP accepts are letter of credit or the insurance. If the company is working in consortium, they can agree with the other parties. ANP, as mentioned, by Bruno. And we, I think the minister also mentioned this. The largest oil surplus will win. So the same consortium must, if the company is an operator A, has to be qualified as such, and you can also have a non-operator that would come in as an investor and would have could be part of a consortium. So it's important to consider that Petrobras express its preference right, and this might be a different consortium, and this might happen in the auction. As a representative from the union, PPSA naturally is a part of the consortium, the winning consortium. Now a little on the procedure. On the auction day, December 17th, companies mandatorily must be present in the auction, and if they're not present, they can be penalized, and they will present their envelopes and say if they participate alone, if they're bidding alone or participating in a consortium, or they must say they're not participating in any offer. So secrecy must be kept until the end of the process. So when it's open, we can have transparency and secrecy up to the end. It's possible that the special bidding commission who leads the works in the auction, the commission, if there is a block that didn't go off, the session can be reopened to what we call after the public session. We have an important date that I'd like to follow the procedures done by ANP, and the relevant date is February 18th of 2022, where you have to pay for the subscription bonus, pay according to what you offered in the public session. So thank you. I had a brief presentation on purpose, calling your attention to the issues I consider relevant to this auction, the operational process, so to say, for the auction. The presentation is available, and I also left the indicators where you can get more information. So at any moment, if you are an interested party, you can send an email to rodadas@anp.gov.br, and we will get back to you. You can send it in English or Portuguese, and we will be available to reply to any doubt or question that the company should have. So thank you, Padilha. I hope I was on time. Thank you all. And once again, greetings to my panelist colleagues. I hope next year we do this in person. Very well. Thank you, Giselle, for your speech. clarification on the bidding process were very relevant. So I'd like to keep on with the panel with our last speaker. We invite you, Director of Studies of Biofuels, Oil and Gas from research company, Ms. Heloísa Borges Esteves. Heloísa, welcome, please. You have the floor.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Well, good morning, everyone. My panelist colleagues, it's a pleasure to be here. This process was involved many government bodies and a significant effort. And I will present a little bit of the wrap up of the future view we have. We've been talking about the projects. As they said, it's first class. Brazilian government had a tremendous effort to bring more attractiveness to these projects, and ANP comes as usual maintaining a predictable chronogram with a historic of respecting the contracts. We talk a lot about decarbonization and energetic evolving. So the hydrocarbons in the world matrix in the transport sector has the majority of the demand of the oil and is responsible for 60% of the global demand of energy in the world. And the greatest part of this are in the sector that we call hard to abate, aviation, shipping, and industrial. We need to understand that when we talk about the transition, the oil will be extremely necessary. This is no surprise. Even though when we don't think about these classic sectors, we need to remember that the oil is an integrating part of the modern life. So we encounter, even in makeup that I put on today, to use my makeup and in the computer we're using, all these items that are a part of our modern life, they come somehow, they are based in products that are made of oil. In Brazil, besides Brazil having one of the most renewable matrices of the world, some countries want to get to this point in 2050. Brazil made this transition based on air, wind power, and sugarcane. The hydrocarbons are still important in our matrix today and in the future. Once again, the responsibles for this are the transport sector, the industry, which are non-energy uses. When we go through this and take a look at the future, the global matrix and Brazilian matrix are going to change. We're at mid-transition, but I'd like to highlight that at the moment, since we started talking about the transition, we're talking about energy adding more than power transitioning. The world will still need a lot of energy. Countries in development still need to duplicate or triplicate their consumption of energy to guarantee their development. Even considering substitution of sources. I brought here an example, a recent example, which is one of the most aggressive scenarios in terms of fulfilling the Paris Agreement, and many other enterprises last week were represented, shown their scenario, the National Agency of Energy, and also as happened to the biomass, traditional biomass, wood and coal. When we look, we take a look at decarbonization, it means that the percentage of participation in the energy reduces, but the quantity, the total amount of hydrocarbons consumed still increase for a while. Nowadays, we consume a lot more coal than we consumed 30 years ago, even though we have decarbonized and advanced in a series of processes. So we will need a lot of energy still, even in the scenarios of big oil and energy transition that are more aggressive to the production of natural and oil gas. They are still essential to the countries and to the enterprises. So we're talking about how to position in a world of transition, and we still need to add more energy in an absolute way to their matrices. In the Brazilian 10-year forecast, we predict an expressive increasing on the Brazilian participation in production of oil in the global scope. This increase is from pre-salt. We predict a yearly increasing of almost 10% of the production of pre-salt, putting Brazil above 5 million of barrels per day of production. In Atapu and Sépia, so we can have an idea of the importance and the value of those fields. As Osman said, they are first-class fields and they already have their strategy of development approved and defined. Atapu and Sépia will start producing more and more, and everything indicates that we've been conservative in our projections, in our forecasts, because they have tremendous potential that combined can reach for 15% of the total national production by the end of 2030. And for natural gas, this is also true. We talk about oil, but these fields, the production can reach and represent 11% of the domestic production of natural gas in 2030, reminding you that the natural gas in the Brazilian strategy is the main fuel of our transition. It is very important for our energy matrix. When we talk about disruptive or increasing hydrogen, it's very clear for Brazil a strategy of taking advantage of our potential of natural gas in the transition for our hydrogen economy. And talking specifically more about this, the government's been working in a report, and this will be clear by the end of the year. We will publish a few documents making this strategy clear and how the hydrogen will insert itself in the matrix of Brazil, in case this is the pathway and indeed our transition moves on faster than predicted before. We've done a lot, this was already said, to guarantee the attractiveness and jurisdictional safety. When we take a look at our long-term scenarios, the tremendous effort we made in the compensation agreement was mentioned before, and we consider a great victory not only bringing the safety of having well-defined and established values, but also the strategy of the Brazilian government of negotiating these values with a different price compatible with scenarios, but also putting a cap that in the value of the table of worn out of the compensation is very clear. There is a gap of $72, prices above that. There is no additional payment of the compensation. In this way, we can maintain a resistant project to lower prices, and at the same time, guarantee that all parties are paid for in higher, more expensive scenarios. We see geopolitical movements and energy movements seek to guarantee the safety of supply chain, but also to create for the countries a reorganizing movement of the investment in the oil industry. And what have we done to increase the attractiveness of the second auction of the surplus volumes of the onerous section? I separated here 6 main points. The agreements of co-participation are well defined. This was a central aspect. The agreement of co-participation is attached to this meeting's editorial, guaranteeing the strategy that in the first day of the sharing agreement, the companies already have access to the oil. So you acquire reservations that are being made. The content of the data packages were reviewed. I saw that there was a question made about this, if they were included, if the data hadn't stopped in 2019, some additional data is possible. As it was mentioned, ANP is and will always be available for clearing, for sending doubts, allowing clearness and certainty in the calculation of earnouts, which would be the third component, important component. And it's possible to be calculated once the base of assets audited are already integrated in the data packages. A series of improvements were done in the legal and regulatory framework, and it's clear in the co-participation agreement the possibility of operation in the part of sharing agreement, since this is the agreement and the will of the parties. EMME brought an important, which is the limitations of liability. So the responsibilities are clear. The limitation of the liability in the sharing agreement are an important advancement in the better pricing of risks, increasing of the attractiveness of the auction to all the effort, driver of transparency and predictability were important in all the government deeds. Step by step, every step was taken very safely with the participation and with the Federal Court of Accounts, which is very important for legal safety, published to bringing this new progress. I'd like to highlight a few points that are important. The world will still need a lot of oil long term, even in the most optimistic and challenging scenarios. There still will be a great demand of oil. The world still needs a lot of energy, and most of this energy will come from oil. This means not that more oil will be produced in the future, but that the oil that will be produced in the future will need two qualities. The assets need to be resilient to prices, taxes, more volatile prices, and they need to be produced with a lower intensity of carbon. Brazil is well positioned in both requirements. The strategies particularly benefits enterprises that are positioned in the Middle East or in Brazil. This allows these demands that are very important in the future. The VPL of the project is very important. We are aware of this, as Bruno has shown. We made an effort to increase the attractiveness of the project, guaranteeing the gains of the union, the profits of the union. I believe we were we succeeded in these requirements, but also reservations are important that may get to represent an additional of almost 15% of the volumes, depending on the scenarios they are used and the criteria used. So even in aggressive scenarios, Brazil is at an advantage and it's the place to be at. This project has a very attractive team. There will be gigantic, the project is already ongoing. And Brazil allows a compensation strategy. We talked about the agreements. Brazil has a well-established scenario. It's a very resilient scenario in legal safety. Great potential of increasing of the domestic demand and the Brazil economy. I talked about assets. The regulatory agencies are independent and extremely qualified and competent. I know that me talking about it is a bit suspicious, but really, I mean it. They have opportunities of hiring, clear opportunities of an organic increasing of the portfolio of the enterprises, of taking advantage of globally of different basins. As bonuses, enterprises that are strongly positioned in Brazil are able to advance in strategies of total energy, becoming an energy enterprise, and analyzing this is it's an extreme advantage. So they can take advantage and invest in a quick way in renewable energies, biomass, biofuels of second generation, which are all projects in which Brazil have significant advantages in proven world leadership. So why should you invest in Brazil? In the honors section, we have enumerated the regulatory framework related to the first round, where quantify different attributes related to transparency, legal safety in a regulatory framework. We are feeling secure. At the same time, not only increase the economics, but reduce uncertainties of the project. A brief wrap up to finish my speech. All my colleagues mentioned this before. Brazil is focused on transparency, attractiveness, and certainty, safety of the investment. There is a very important driver, which is all the guarantee for the investor, also guarantee of access to oil on day one. You can notice in the agreement of co-participation and its attachments were improved. We thought about everything that could make it difficult, make this difficult, make the objective difficult. The governance that the Secretary Bruno Eustáquio mentioned at the beginning of the webinar allowed a greater economic value that include many technical bodies of the federal government. And at the same time, is a well-known process that which the enterprises are used to, signing up and presentation of documents, as Osman mentioned, will surprise you for its quality. And being positioned in Brazil is being well positioned in the transitioning world. That was it. Thank you.
Agradeço à diretora
Thank you, Heloísa Borges, for your presentation. And I invite all panelists to turn on their cameras so we can have a final chat answering to some of your questions. So I invite Director Amorelli, Director Osman, and the Executive Secretary Bruno Eustáquio to turn on your cameras so we can begin. Once again, I remind you that ApexBrasil will organize virtual and in-person meetings during the APC. You can just send an email to oil and gas at the presentations will be made available at the email and also investinbrazil.com.br website. First question will be for Director Amorelli from INP. Which technical and financial requirements do we have for qualification? Just summing it up, this is important. Main technical requirement I'd mention is the company or the group or the consortium having a qualification of operator A.
Operador A, que significa, ou seja, ela tem
Meaning it has to have the expertise of working in ultra deep waters. In case of the economic financial issue, it needs assets of around 360 million, and within the consortium, once there is a non-operator, the party that comes as an investor has to have around 90 million assets, and that's proved through results, auditing, independent auditing. So there's a list on the slides, but this is an important question because the transfers, the classifications, the main classifications you must have to be able to participate. Second question, Russell Martin for PPSA and IPA, how the compensation payment base work? Yes, actually, this is a question, maybe the $1 million question. It was the major work was to have a total understanding of the situation and negotiation with Petrobras. This compensation is a counterparty to Petrobras for the fact that when we have the sharing contracts, there should be some contracts already ongoing, and in this way, it's fair that Petrobras should have a refund of the values already spent. And so the way we found for these asset transfer to be calculated was exactly to measure the difference, the value difference, the net value between the original production curve from Petrobras in the onerous transfer and the production curve when both are being done together, onerous cession and surplus production sharing. So this curve was flattened. Obviously, oil and time is money, so this value was esteemed, and this is the value to be paid to Petrobras in terms of compensation for the previous investment and the asset transfer. Obviously, Petrobras will get a net value in principle, but that will be submitted to taxation, And these taxes will be paid by the party coming in. So Petrobras, when paying, ends up remaining with the original value. And on top of that, there's an earn-out clause that was found. So we shouldn't have this difficulty for calculating the compensation in oil value. So we chose to calculate the value we had at the time, $40 per barrel, knowing that oil, when going up, we would all earn more. And while earning more, it's fair to have this loss compensation for Petrobras. So this is the whole process, and reminding you that the compensation, as well as gross up and the eventual earn-out payments, are values that are recognizable as costs in oil, relevant for the parties to have their economic assessments. Perfect. Eloisa, would you like to complement with some information? Yes, just a small addition. The logic of the compensation calculation is the same logic already known at since 2019. So pricing for compensation was done for when the new strategy for negotiation would come. The difference, the value of the whole infrastructure implemented, we established the price with the difference of the VPL in case there was no interference, and the VPL2, considering the shared production contract coming in after the onerous session. This was calculated with a new strategy for development, and it's a common doubt I'd like to clarify. Once this compensation payment was done in the way it's come according to the MME norm and the call, there is no the asset acquirement, there's no additional payment apart from the value that is established. This must be very clear, because many companies asked afterwards, will we have to pay for something else? So the value of the asset acquisition is already established in the call, in the way it is established in the call. This brings legal safety, although companies are free to negotiate the payment deadlines and the way the payments should be done, but the value is established. Thank you, Eloisa, for your answer. And Osmo, I will bring another question to Dirceu. Morelia, which are the critical frameworks? You mentioned this, but just to reinforce, which are the main critical frameworks for the auction? How does the transition period work after the auction? Thank you, Padilha. Eloisa doesn't let me lie, so to say. If you saw my presentation, it was pretty focused on the deadlines, dates, and the period regarding the process. But this question is important because we've already seen companies worried with documents, etc., and for some reason they lose the deadline. But in the period before the auction, I'd say November 1st is when the company makes the registry, pays for the fee that later provides access to data package. November 25th, the offer guarantee. So the company is preparing for the transfer, which is for the session, which is December 17th, 2021, and the company has to go there. They can't abandon the process because we do it in such a way that it can be protected by secrecy up to the opening of the envelope, and we assure competitiveness in this manner. So after the auction, when the companies win, there are some procedures, document delivery, inspection of many things that ANP does this together with the companies. ANP is pretty close at this moment, pretty close to the companies doing these actions and inspecting all the documents, which is the preparation for signing the contract, the co-participation agreement, and after the sharing, production sharing contract itself. I'd say February 18 of 2021. That's when the company has to honor what she committed to in December 17th in the public session. Then we have the date for signature foreseen for April, but this is a bit more flexible because once everything is in order. So it's interesting, things are switched around after the company pays. They want to sign on the next day, so it's easier to inspect because the companies are in a hurry then, because they are also demanded by the shareholders, they invested and they want to take over. I think that's very good. So thank you very much. Thank you for the clarification, Andres. So I will bring another question to Osman. Strategy for development that must be in the co-participation agreement can be changed by the consortium after the contract signature. Carlos, good question. I'd say it should be changed. This was a preliminary view, a good view with best information available at the time when we began negotiations and calculations. This strategy that was more or less what I described was very much used for the track participation calculation and for the compensation calculation. Surely it will be a baseline for everyone who's coming in futurely in the auction, but and also in the public call, but there's a 180 deadline for the consortium to present a development plan to ANP where everything that was discussed, elaborated, and written down with best information at the time can be changed in agreements with the participants in their OPCOM. So we wanted to provide a preliminary view to serve as a guideline for the calculations, but in no way would we want to handcuff the participants in a vision that is lost in time and that can be enhanced regarding what was mentioned. So summing it up, the answer is yes. Thank you very much, Osman, for the clarification. I will bring a question to Eloisa. She even mentioned something about this, but just to reinforce, we'd like to know if the data package shared for technical assessment and economic assessment is based on 2019 or in the most recent production and status of the wells. I think maybe Director Morelli can complement, but the data package was reviewed from 2019 for this procurement, including recent data and even from participants' feedback from 2019 including new information or bringing a whole set of new information that it could be possible to obtain. It was enhanced since 2019. Production data, even technical information that was available are not. Some of the 2019 information is still there, but we added more. Morelli, would you like to? I'd like to add something to both questions. First is, Dr. Osman mentioned, it's dynamic. The development plan begins being a part of a dynamic of the field during the concession term, and up ahead, if you want to have a renovation after the legal term, it's reviewed and the investments have to be managed by ANP. So that's correct. And just to add, it's not static and cannot be, because every new data in every moment, and I will go into Eloisa's answer, every new information we have while managing the field, we have new modeling. Osman is a specialist at this, so he knows what I'm talking about, because it's part of the reservoir engineering and managing. So the data we have are always crude, because the interpretation that each company does is their own. So we don't bring the interpretation the companies provide, but raw data, because normally, although there are no differences amongst the softwares that make these assessments or reserve modeling, but the companies have different expertise, different treatments in modeling the data. So it's correct. And just to add to what Eloisa mentions, every time we have new data, we make this available in a procedure such as this, but the data companies prefer this, in my understanding. They will do their assessments themselves, their modeling themselves regarding this. Okay, excellent. I'd like to thank everyone that's watching us. More than 120 inscriptions. We reached 90 people watching online, live, and we still have 70 people online. So I will have another 2 questions to conclude once our time is up. So, Luisa, would you like to say something?
Desculpa, Casa, é que eu estava aqui
No,
pensando.
I was thinking
Mas eu queria complementar.
I'd like to add a clarification on the question on the contracts transition. I'd like to highlight some extremely important points in modeling that ANP placed in public consultations. When there's an annex to the calls where you have the model for the consortium contract and also an ACP model, and it's clear that the agreement must be signed and delivered before the sharing, and its efficacy begins from the sharing contract signature, and it's not necessary to have the effective payment, and you don't have to pay the whole amount, but it's necessary. The companies have to be in agreement regarding the payment. That means when you sign the co-participation agreement before the sharing contract, and this is before going into action, the question was on the transition. I'd like to remind you that ANP had an effort to provide legal robustness to assure that the companies should join the process quickly. Thank you, Elisa, for the additional clarification. There are many questions on compensation value, so I will reinforce once it's a recurring question. The value of compensation is established in the grant price 40. Is that correct? We didn't understand the variable value when the brand price is 70. What's the adjustment mechanism? PPSA or Petrobras will share the economic model? I think it's to you, Osman. Actually, I even answered in writing to, and I answered openly to everyone. You have my email, because eventually it can be a long answer, but the idea behind compensation the whole time was to define a value without knowing the future behavior of oil. So the calculation was done on top of those asset transfer data, the VPL recovery in Petrobras, and it was done on $30. Branch was done. If we look at the market, we already see 70 or something. So to come out of this trap, I calculate 40, tomorrow is 50, I'll calculate 50, and it drops to 30. We structured this model where there is an initial value calculated at 40, and each year there is a chart of the call documents, PROCEP chart or ATAPU, Sépia and Atapu charts, where we assess if the oil went over the 40. If it went over 40, it's a sign that Petrobras, who came in, the union, so all parties are winning more value in the project. So we work cheering for the oil to go up. So if the oil went up and everyone is being rewarded in a positive view of the process, it's reasonable, it's fair that Petrobras, which had the value esteemed at 40, should have this recalculation for the present oil value. So this was done in this way. The gross up value is nothing more than including in the taxes in the calculation. So Petrobras, when receiving the money, should pay for the taxes and should keep on with a fair net value to recompose its VPL. And the earnout will work for 10 years. That was negotiated. Obviously, if oil drops below 40, there's no recomposition, and if it goes to 45, there's a chart with a value, and it was calculated based on the profits we will all have when the value goes up, and there is part of it that's brought back to Petrobras. People used to M&A world have some experience with these earnout clauses. So in general guidelines, this is the process. If you want, take down the note, osmon.coelho@ppta.gov.br. You can write to us and we will have the largest specialists with our also legal aid to clarify an issue that effectively is not so simple, and that led to much discussion and analyze what was foreseen to negotiate a solution that I think would be good for all within. Perfect, Osman. Thank you very much. Can I move to the last question, or does anyone want to say anything? Can I conclude? There's a last question from the representative of Shell Brazil, thanking for the event and the presentations. And the question is on the right to give up for Petrobras. Is there any penalty for this hypothesis in case it happens? Is it for the sale? Yes, today we do have. First auction, there was no penalty, but today we have a penalty. Would anyone like to say anything else, or can we go to final words, reminding everyone that the presentations will be shared by email and at investbrasil.com.br website. Meetings can be scheduled by oil and gas at apexbrasil.com.br. So I'd like to have a last round, a minute of final words, beginning by Eloisa, Amorelli and Osman, so we can close our webinar. Thank you. I'd like to place myself at your disposal. I think Apex mentioned that the presentations will be available. I'd like to reinforce that this group here is available for meeting schedules, as Apex mentioned, online in July, but in person, we will have at OTC, we will be at OTC in Houston if you want a in-person meeting at OTC. I think it's easier to clarify doubts. I'd like to thank you for the invitation. And there was a last question that I don't think I could answer. I will briefly answer. Atapu and Sépia are areas who have SIP and WIPE, depending on the area, but are approved by ANP, as Morelli mentioned. And in the instruments, it's clear that actually what does the agreement for co-participation does? It allows division. You have for Sépia and Atapu an neighboring area to allow joint production of the reservoir, and the agreement is a relation between the onerous transfer and the sharing contract in the area, but within the geographic limit. But it's left clear that the approved areas will need a review. The deadlines are clearly established and they will need a review, but we foresee quick contract change to allow immediate access. We remind you that quick access is one of the goals, so the calls have an access with a document to access, immediate access to the sharing contract. And further on, as Osman mentioned, as well as the strategy for development can and should be reviewed, it actually reflects or will reflect the review, participation, and presentation by all parties of a joint plan for the reservoir involving onerous transfer, sharing contract, and the contracts of the neighboring areas. So I'd like to reinforce our availability to talk about the instruments in detail and point these questions out. But we had this worry. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Eloisa, for your speech and your participation in the panel. Thank you for the partnership. And we hope to have an excellent experience in Houston during the 2021 OTC. So, Amorelli, your final words so we can conclude. As you could see, Eloisa is a specialist, so she briefly explained, but this is pretty complex, so these questions sometimes can be briefly answered or can be explained in more detail by us, as she mentioned. And it's interesting, they are intelligent solutions that we found so the contracts can start up. The auction, when the company comes and does this, as I mentioned before, this is dynamic. As you understand, the reservoir, this also has a dynamic that can be
Passa a ser filme, não retrato. Mas e aí?
Begins to be a movie, not a picture. So the company is more at ease because it's in the consortium and understands the reserve more, and you can do this managing. So because of this, I left at Rodadas at anp.gov.br, and we'll have the chance at OTC, as Eloisa mentioned, to spend some more time to clarify or get into more details, because the doubts are relevant, but they are pretty complex to be answered briefly. So I'm at your disposal. Our team at ANP is at your disposal. Investors can have meetings not only at OTC nowadays. With this digital world, it's pretty easy to meet. So we are here at your disposal to clarify or go into more details regarding any doubts you might have regarding the auction. Thank you very much. Greetings to you all. You too, Padilha. Thank you, Morelli. Excellent speech. Thank you for your participation in the panel. I thank you for your partnership. Osmond, please, it's your time for the final words. Thank you, Carlos, Morelli, Luisa, other colleagues that participated. It was a huge pleasure to be able to be here and to be able to have reached this moment. And it was a dedication process, much obstination, creation to be able to find a joint solution that should please everyone and that we could bring to you today. When I was young, long time ago, there was a composer I liked called Fernando Brandes. And Fernando Brandes had a song where he said, if what we did was worth, more worth is what we will do. And we are in this situation. We've done a lot, but from now onwards is where we're going to win this game by us all and the goal in the end of the year at the auction. So I am very happy, but I wait for this last movement to be able to celebrate together, because I have no doubt it will be a well-succeeded auction and we will be able to celebrate as major works should be celebrated. Thank you all. Thank you for the opportunity. I left my email and I'm absolutely at your disposal to help in whatever you need. Greetings to you all. Excellent, Osmond. Thank you all for the partnership, you and your whole team at PPSA. Thank you for being here with us. It's a complex issue and requires much interaction so we can clarify all doubts and have a well-succeeded auction, bringing more investments to Brazil at the end of the year and helping in the economic and social development in our country. Our time is up, so the questions that couldn't be answered now will be sent to the speakers so they can have specific answers. Thank you all for being here. And once again, if you want to schedule virtual or in-person meetings, please send us an email to oilandgas@apexbrasil.com.br. Today's speeches will be made available, and also the speeches at the YouTube channel and the link of the speakers and the audience will be sent by email so the content can be shared. Thank you all. We wish you success and good luck. Count on Apex Brazil to help you develop your investment project. Thank you very much.